having the game on Monday has never been inconvenient until you're wanting to go to that game. Hey, welcome back to another episode of How to Pretend to Like Sports. I'm your host, Monica Woodhams, and this is the first episode of January 3rd, 2023. So before we get started, you've probably heard by now in the sports world what happened during this week's game, Buffalo Bills against Cincinnati Bengals. Damar Hamlin, he collapsed on the field and they had to do CPR, and then he went to the hospital and is in critical condition. So they canceled the game, which they absolutely had to. It was so hard to watch, and to watch the players who just looked absolutely devastated. As of now, there's no plans to replay that game. I think they're talking about just making it be a tie, but that is truly the least of anyone's worries right now because there really isn't an update on how he's doing. He's 24 years old. He's so young, and it's been hard for the sports community to really process what's going on right now. But I did want to mention that his foundation, Chasing M's, has been getting so much love over the last almost 24 hours now. I think it's something like $4 million in just a matter of hours. So if you want to go check that out on Instagram, it's just Chasing M's. So Chasing MS. So if you want to check that out. At the end of the day, this is just such a reminder that these are people on the field. These are humans, friends, family, sons, parents, dads. And a lot of times I think fans get really caught up in being, and just like looking at them like they're sort of avatars, like they're playing a video game. And at the end of the day, these are humans. And I think that this was a huge reminder. So in honor of the Michigan TCU game, where TCU beat Michigan and is going to the national championship, I'm wearing TCU shirt. You can't really see it, but it's the Riff Ram shirt. It's weird how purple almost always looks blue on camera. I had to go casual to show that TCU spirit, and I'm honestly kind of still shocked that TCU won, but they played so well. Such an exciting game to watch. TCU was up the whole game, and there were 2 pick sixes. So 2 times they intercepted the ball from Michigan and then scored from that. So that was really exciting. And a really notable part of that game was that it took Michigan a really long time to score a touchdown, which means that the TCU defense was doing exactly what they needed to do. They were playing so well. And I call that out because so many people will say the Big 12 is offense only. They wouldn't be able to hold their own against the Big 10 or the SEC because they don't have defense. And this really proves that the defense was a huge part of the game. That was really cool to watch. And it honestly shocked so many people. I think a lot of people were still hanging on to TCU being in the playoffs as kind of a fluke, and that it was because they're just not in the same league as these other teams. But at the end of the day, they showed up, they did exactly what they needed to do, and they beat Michigan. That's not a fluke. You don't just end up in the national championship because of some random fluke. Like, you only get there if you do what you need to do, and every team knows that. I think even the Michigan players thought that it was going to be such an easy win. There was an interview, press conference, and one of the players was like, what conference are they even in? And it's like, okay, come on, dude. It's not like the Big 12 is some Division 3 conference. And so I think there was a big ego part to that. And I think this is really exciting for football because so many times it's so predictable who's going to go to the national championship or even the playoffs. And I think we should all be excited about TCU being in there, the underdogs, a team that we never thought we would see there. And that makes it exciting. It makes it less predictable. And I think that that's, at the end of the day, a really good thing for college football. So yesterday I was thinking, oh my gosh, I didn't get a Star Telegram, which is the Fort Worth newspaper. TCU's in Fort Worth. And I have kind of on display on a blanket ladder. Instead of blankets, I have newspapers. So I have the Kansas City Star from when the Chiefs won the Super Bowl. So I was like, oh, this would be great to add to that. And so I asked my aunt if she knew anyone who still subscribes to the Star Telegram. Not many people do. And so she went and looked into it, and she heard back from one of her friends, and her friend was like, the story didn't make it into the Sunday paper. Even though the game ended at like 7:30, in theory, that is more than enough time for something to make it into the paper. And she was like, no, their editors are in Kansas City, not Fort Worth. And they just couldn't fit it in, which I thought was just absolutely wild because it's such a big deal for Fort Worth. But obviously, if your editors aren't in Fort Worth, they don't have the same pulse on the culture of that town. And it really goes to show just where the newspaper industry is right now. I think we all knew it was tanking and has been tanking, but this is just really a whole nother level. And it's wild to think about because when I was at TCU, I studied advertising public relations, which was within the journalism school. So was surrounded around either teachers who also wrote for the Star Telegram or people who were interning there. And it was a legit paper. And so it's so wild to think that this is where it is now. Back to the game. So at the very last few seconds, I think that was the most stressful point of the game because TCU was up by 6 points. So the second Michigan scored, they would win because there were only seconds left in the game and there wouldn't be enough time for TCU to get the ball back and score. But Michigan had this botched play with the last few seconds, and that meant that TCU would get the ball and TCU would win the game. But there was a flag and they had to review a targeting call. And I swear this was the longest, I don't know, I think it was like 5 minutes. It felt like forever, where they were debating whether or not it was a targeting call. And I really think this would have made the game. I think if it had been a targeting call, I think Michigan could have pulled off scoring just based off of how they had been playing the second half. But it was not targeting, and it meant that TCU gets to go on to the national football game. I'm so excited. I'm going with some friends. I told my friend Lee, we have to do some stereotypical LA things. That was one of the most fun things when I lived in LA. I lived there for like 3 years. And it's always fun to do like the silly LA things. And I say silly LA things, like this was a part of my life. Like I would go to Erewhon and get a smoothie that was like $17. But now it feels silly and super LA and fun. When I told her, okay, we need to think of some super LA things to do, she was like, well, what are those going to be? Because Fred Siegel's not doing great and Kitson is out of business. And I was like, oh my gosh. When I was home, I noticed that I still had a tote bag from Kitson. It just says in the huge logo, Kitson LA, which is like an artifact at this point. I'm really getting off topic today. So back to the TCU game. The Michigan coach, Jim Harbaugh, he is thinking about going back to the NFL. So he did really well as an NFL coach right before he went to Michigan to coach. And it's not really that surprising. So Michigan, even though they're a top team, they actually have lost the last 7 bowl games, 7 including TCU game, which is kind of wild. But anyway, so there's 2 teams that it looks like the media is saying that he's thinking about going to, and that would be the Panthers and the Broncos. And those are 2 teams that just really need a coach right now. And I mean, he did well in the NFL, so you would think that these teams are really going to try and convince him to come on board. Like I mentioned before, TCU is now moving on to the national championship. They're going to play against Georgia on Monday, which having the game on Monday has never been inconvenient until you're wanting to go to that game. But it's in LA and it's at SoFi Stadium, which is brand new. I haven't been there yet, and so I'm really excited to go. I thought the only chance that I would get to go there would be to see the Rams play against the Chiefs. So excited about that. I literally, though, had to Google, is SoFi Stadium covered or open air? Because I was like, shoot, that is 2 completely different outfits. If it's covered and it's like room temperature controlled versus it being like 50 degrees in LA. It felt like such an odd thing to Google. In regards to the game though, Georgia is favored, which is no surprise. They're number 1. They have a really great team. This is their 2nd time in a row going to the national championship, and last year they won and beat Alabama. So it's going to be a really tough game. So right now it's looking like 12.5 point favored Georgia to win. One thing that I think people haven't realized when they're talking about how like weird it is that Georgia's playing TCU, they actually have played each other 4 times in 2 bowl games. In 2016, they played each other in the Liberty Bowl, and Georgia did win. It was 31-23. So it's not like it was a blowout game by any means. I don't remember watching that game, so I don't know like what the momentum looked like and how everyone was playing. But if you do look at that score, that's not a blowout score. That is somewhat of a close game. And I promise I'm not going to make this all about TCU, but I did go to the TCU basketball game on Saturday. That was my New Year's Eve plans. And it was exciting because it is the start of conference play. So it's officially conference play, which means now they are just playing other Big 12 teams. And these are the games that really count. So they played against Texas Tech because like all the TCU fans were in Arizona. There was like no one at this game for TCU. It might as well have been a Texas Tech home game. Everyone around me was Tech fans. There was the most obnoxious guy next to me who was like, thought he was like the Texas Tech mascot or cheerleader or something because he felt like he needed to start every cheer. This is like a 60-year-old man, and I think he was there by himself, but it was so obnoxious. With that like home game atmosphere that it felt like for Texas Tech just was killing it. They had the momentum the whole game. They were up the whole game. Finally at halftime, TCU kind of got it together, but it still felt like every shot they were missing. It was so stressful. And then in the last like maybe 2-3 minutes, they pulled it together and they won. And that's what matters. Going into the game, TCU was ranked 18, I believe, and Texas Tech was unranked. And my friend I was with, she was like, so what happens to the rankings if TCU loses? And I was like, well, if TCU loses, a ranked team loses to a unranked team. Typically, this early on in the season will just fall off the top 25. If it's further on this season and they're maybe in the top 15 or top 10, then they'll just get pushed up. But in that case, I think TCU probably would have fallen off. And then with the win, they're now ranked 17. I don't know how the other games went, so I don't necessarily think that going from 18 to 17 was because of that win. I think it's probably a reflection of other games that happened and moving around the rankings. But at the end of the day, a conference win is a conference win. So TCU pulled it off. That was a big day for TCU, New Year's Eve. Wrap it up with a little more college football. I'll wrap it up with a little more college basketball. Rutgers, who is unranked, beat #1 Purdue. And that's huge in and of itself. But this is actually the second time in a row that Rutgers has beat Purdue. So they've got their number. So that's what I've got for you. Thanks for listening. If you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe. Follow me on the TikTok at How to Pretend to Like Sports, on Instagram at Monica Woodhams. Make sure you hit subscribe and like and all the things. But thank y'all for watching and listening. And I cannot wait to report back from the national championship game. Go Frogs!